afternoon, everyone. So excited that we're here today with Jeni. Jeni is currently the Community Outreach Director with Game Rangers International. So Jeni, thank you so much for sitting with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I was hoping you could just give a quick, for anyone who might not know on the call, quick, 30-second blurb about what your current role is at GRI, what you're doing right now.
Yeah, sure. Is my sound okay, first of all?
Yeah, you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, brilliant. So for those who don't know, Game Rangers International, or GRI, is a conservation organization based in Zambia. We work very closely with the Department of National Parks and Wildlife and local communities to conserve wildlife and wild spaces. And we empower rangers across 3 core thematics: wildlife rescue, resource protection, and community outreach. So as said, I am working in that community outreach sphere, and we're really sort of taking a 3-tiered approach to that space. So conservation education, we're working in primary schools to deliver weekly contextually relevant conservation material. Conservation awareness, so we have twice weekly radio shows going out to some of those communities that are living adjacent to protected areas. And then thirdly, working with women. So at the moment we have 10 women's groups, and we empower them to start their own sustainable livelihood business, like small businesses or income generation projects. And all that work is predominantly on the borders of Kafue National Park.
And right now you're currently in the UK, right? Where are you, I guess sheltering in place or wherever you're right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was based in Zambia for 5 years. And then about 2.5 years ago, relocated back to the UK to have a baby. Wanted that sort of support network of my family close by. So I'm now working remotely for GRI in the south of England, sort of Winchester area. And yeah, that's been holed up for the last 3-4 months.
Yeah, where we've all been inside. Now, is Winchester, is that where you grew up, or is it close by? How?
Yeah. So I was actually born in the States, but we relocated to UK when I was about 2, I think. And then, yeah, pretty much in this same area is where I spent most of my sort of childhood and adolescence.
Gotcha. In childhood, mom, dad, siblings?
Yeah, mom, dad, an older sister and an older brother. So there's 2 years between each of us. Yeah, and a baby.
So when you relocated back over to the UK and started school in the UK and stuff, what kind of kid were you? Were you really academic? Did you like playing sports? What was kind of your thing?
So not academic at all. I actually have severe dyslexia. And ironically enough, I'm sort of the person who proofreads most of the content for GRI, and everything kind of comes through me. But I think as a result of that sort of struggle with dyslexia and reading, I sort of developed tools over the course of my sort of academic life. And I'm now very, very thorough in picking up little mistakes and things. So yeah, definitely in the bottom set for everything. Not especially sporty, a little bit quiet and awkward. I loved drama, reading, I guess ballet and all the sort of usual things little girls love.
And how about your brothers and sisters? Did you guys kind of get along from an early age, or was it like, beating the crap out of each other, which was kind of my experience?
Yeah, so they're both sort of very different characters. They actually both have very, very severe psychological issues. And I think that experience in my sort of adolescence, from probably the age of 10, we were kind of living in a space where there was a sort of daily threat that one or other of them might not sort of make it to the end of the day. So
Yeah.
early childhood, like great, we were a very, very well traveled family. My parents both extremely successful working in IBM, so we had great exposure to lots of great places, so much opportunity to travel, to go on safari. Yeah, I guess reaching adolescence, sort of things got difficult in my household.
Right.
And I guess my response to that challenge was to develop the strongest sense of wanderlust that you ever probably came across. Yeah, a bit of a sort of, I'm gonna move away as far as possible, but also maybe an urge to be sort of the best person I could be. Like I had that responsibility on my shoulders that I was gonna be the easy one, the good one. I was gonna achieve great things, and not sort of be defined by that very difficult upbringing.
Yeah, that's a good way to come from a place of strength, right? And you mentioned that your family was well traveled, that you got to experience a lot of things. Now I know that I believe you went on safari the first time at age 9.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of a forming experience for you. So tell us a little bit about that. Where did you go? What did you see? What did you do?
Yeah, so at age 9, my dad was actually stationed in Johannesburg for a couple of years. He was the pensions fund manager for IBM. So he was sent over on assignment and we got to go and visit him. So we traveled throughout South Africa and Botswana at that time. And yeah, I think my parents had this great approach where nothing was sheltered. We're going to see how people live here. And we were very fortunate to go on some really fantastic safaris and have a lot of great sightings. And I think even from that early age, you know, or whoever, you know, goes to Africa, you're struck by so much color and vibrance and the smells and even the feel of like the dust on your skin. It's just like this overwhelming sense of calmness and peace for me. It was kind of one of those turning points where a little click goes off and this is where I belong. I want to come back here again and again and again.
Do you think that the peaceful atmosphere and the peacefulness is what really hooked you and kind of gave you maybe a little bit of that you weren't experiencing at home just because of some of the situations you were dealing with, and that was really what drew you there?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, there's nothing quite like being on a game viewer and watching wildlife to really be able to switch off to every other thing that's going on in your life. There was, yeah, just a draw, I think. I got the bug.
Obviously, we're on safari. It was a temporary experience at that point. You're back in the UK, 9-10 years old, and then I guess you're starting, I know it's kind of called different things. In the States, it would be called high school. Maybe in the UK, it's called levels. When you, so you kind of come back to school, and then your mind is still in Africa. So you work towards, so what do you do from that point on? Do you get involved in sort of different organizations in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, I was 100% a wildlife nerd. Like the wildlife aspect was such a draw for me, but my passion was and has always been the people. And I was 100% determined that I was going to go into this sort of development focus. So I think for me, the main thing was volunteering. I kind of threw myself into volunteering wherever I could. So initially I started once a week going and working in a youth club for young people with severe disabilities. And then by the age of 15, I went to Romania to work in an orphanage. By the end of high school, I moved to the West Indies post Hurricane Ivan and was living in Grenada for several months. Again, working in an orphanage with young kids, doing a lot of work around transactional sex trade that exists there with these little tiny girls, and trying to think of sort of alternative livelihood options for them. They're the kind of nutmeg industry was sort of devastated by this hurricane. So yeah, I just threw myself into various volunteering opportunities and tried to kind of expose myself to as many different walks of life as possible.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. So when you came back and you started working on those projects, did you continue a traditional schooling, or were you like in a homeschool environment, or how did that work? There you are.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was at a very traditional private school. I think probably a very sheltered traditional private school, and a very academic school. So our options were sort of doctor, lawyer, the usual stuff. And I didn't know how to get to where I wanted to be. And like I said, I had the sort of learning difficulties, lacked total confidence in school. And so at that stage, I stuck to what I was good at, which was writing stories. And so for my kind of A-levels, I ended up doing all kind of essay subjects, creative subjects. And from having sort of relatively bad GCSEs, for my last year and sort of the final year of high school, I just kind of locked myself in a library and would time myself doing essays for like an hour every single day. And I ended up turning it around, and I managed to get 3 A's in my A-levels. And I think, yeah, took everyone by surprise, maybe my parents most of all.
You just had to find your way, right?
Yeah, just got to learn what works for you, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to touch on quickly, because I know specifically, and I might correct me if I mispronounce this, you were in Kazakhstan for a while on one assignment. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I think I was 24, I moved to Kazakhstan, like you do. And I was stationed there as sort of youth development facilitator. So I was working with young people right from babies up to the age of university. A lot of work in the HIV awareness sector, but also business skills for young people, careers advice, English. There isn't as many opportunities there, so I guess just trying to empower young people with life skills and opportunities. A lot of them managed to get scholarships to the US for their university. So just working with either individuals or groups.
Okay, I thought that was earlier in your life, and so I kind of want to rewind a little bit back. So you talked about kind of what you were doing during high school, et cetera, you know, getting into sort of your groove with the more, I guess, subjective subjects, if you will.
Yeah.
So you graduate high school, and then what's next? You went on to university?
Yeah, so I went to university in Cardiff just for 3 years. I studied English literature, which at the time, you know, seems like, what am I going to do with this? But sport will tell you that I spend a lot of my daily life now writing reports. So it's actually very useful to have those sort of analytical and written skills, I think. And then after graduating university, I worked for an oral health charity. So we would send portable dental equipment to developing countries around the world. So I spent a couple of years doing that whilst I was applying for this opportunity in Kazakhstan.
Gotcha. So then tell us about, you went through your schooling, you graduated, you did all this, and then it's a really interesting story how you linked up with GRI. So tell us a little bit about that, and kind of, that was after you came back from Kazakhstan, is that correct?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to Kazakhstan because it kind of paves the way for what happened with me ending up in Zambia with GRI. So it's a very difficult place to live. I would only be able to really describe it as grey. we as a organization suffered a huge amount of hostility amongst the older generation, I would say. There was a lot of suspicion and ill feeling towards the organization that I was with, and we ended up getting a lot of pressure from the KGB. We would have officers sit in our classrooms and just stare directly at us. A couple of my colleagues had their apartments overturned. A huge number of us suffered from sexual assaults, daily hurling of abuse at us. I was assaulted on a 48-hour train ride. It's a huge country. But it was almost this boiling pot situation, you know, the frog in the boiling pot. Just at the time, you're like, yeah, this is fun and interesting and different, and I'm making a difference, and these kids are getting somewhere with their lives. And we didn't kind of know what was happening, I think, until, yeah, I guess the press got hold of what was going on. And overnight, basically, we got a phone call and said, don't say anything, don't react to this call, you're being evacuated immediately, you need to pack up your stuff and get on a train. And like I said, I was in Siberia, so I was about 2 hours from the Russian border, right at the top of the country, and had to travel 48 hours down to Almaty. And we were then sort of moving targets. Got into the city, vehicles that we were traveling on were traced for bombs. Had to stay in this huge hotel for about 2 days while they tried to get us all out. And I guess, yeah, for me, Kazakhstan was also punctuated by these life events for me, which maybe is why I wasn't sort of aware of what was going on. So about maybe 14 or 15 months into my placement, my grandfather passed away and I didn't go back. And I know that for me, I felt so guilty that I wasn't there for my family. It was like, what do I do? I'm just going to carry on and keep going. And then 2 months after that, my mum called me and said that my dad had died, and it was completely out of the blue. I couldn't understand what she was telling me because all she was saying was, your dad is dead. And I was like, but no, he died. I thought she meant, you know, her dad. Right. So I couldn't, it was like 3 a.m. in the morning. And all I could get from her on this crazy phone line was, he's dead. He was missing for, I think, like 13 hours. You need to come home. So I had to get in a taxi. I traveled through this sort of steppe of Kazakhstan for, I think it was about 10 hours. And the whole time I was sort of having this vision in my head that my dad had died and been lying in a ditch all this time. And in the end, that wasn't what had happened, but it so affected me. And yeah, I think the whole of that Kazakhstan experience for me ended then, I think another 6 months later, with this huge sort of action-packed evacuation. And I felt like I had lost my father, lost my home, lost my job, lost my friends, my entire identity in one sort of second, and ended back in the UK within like days, not really knowing who I was or what I was going to do next. I had severe PTSD and I had therapy to deal with that for a long time, and grief therapy. But I ended up enrolling in a master's in London, and it was just a one-year course in global health and development. And I feel like I was a little bit older and I'd had these sort of different experiences by then of working in the sector. So was able to bring a little bit more to that course than I'd ever really had the opportunity to do in my academic life. And then, yeah, after graduating, I was job searching. I knew I wanted to get back to Africa. It had always been my pool, and as a family, we'd, you know, over the years traveled so many times, particularly to Botswana. So I started to job search. I wanted somewhere that was English speaking, and that was pretty much my only requirement at that stage. I just needed to get away from this sort of crazy rut that I felt like I was in out of no fault of my own.
Right.
And yeah, applied for various things, and I was willing at that stage to do whatever it took to get out. Mm-hmm. So this role came up with GRI, and the job title was, "Do you want to live in a national park?" So I was like, yeah.
Sure. Why not?
So I applied for the role. I had the interview the following day, got the job the day after that, and was there within 2 weeks. And yeah, they were left with one bag. I thought at that stage I was going as a volunteer for 1 year. And then, yeah, 5 years later, left Zambia with a 20-foot container full of stuff, a husband and a baby in the belly. So yeah, I guess that was kind of just the beginning of the journey.
Do you think when you went back to the UK after you'd suffered all this trauma, you know, both familial and in your working world, do you think your draw to Africa was kind of that draw back to that peace that you had felt the first time you'd been there, and just kind of almost like the familiarness? It's almost kind of like a warm hug or like a cozy embrace or something. Kind of, that's how I felt when I was there. So do you think that that's probably what you were after when you were focused on getting back to Africa?
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, I felt professionally, I felt very unfulfilled because of the number of challenges that I had experienced in Kazakhstan. But also, like you said, it was, that was the real goal. That was my dream always. And I just couldn't shake that urge.
Do you think that was, I guess, influenced, or was your mother and father kind of similar interests? They, you know, were very interested in the people in the community itself. So it was a way sort of to have your father's legacy live on by sort of you continuing those interests and continuing that work?
No, I think they were both absolutely horrified that I wasn't working in IBM. Yeah, for them, both of them are extremely like money driven and sort of title driven, very corporate, workaholics. Absolutely not a good path to go down, I think. And yeah, definitely now proud. Like, my mum thinks it's insane and exciting and incredible, but yeah, as a sort of younger woman, they were just like, okay, just go get out of your system and then come back and.
So tell me how that conversation. Oh, sorry. Tell me how that conversation went. You know, starting at age 15, I guess, through 24, when, you know, you're a female coming from an area of privilege and things like that. You say, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm gonna go, you know, live in Kazakhstan or yeah," and not like, how did that? What was that reaction?
Yeah, I think they just thought I was very ignorant, and I was. So, you know, like I said before, they had lots of things going on, lots of things to worry about, and you know, they kind of let me go because I was desperate, and it was sort of one less worry. It was kind of go do what you have to do and then come back. But I'm sure, yeah, a lot of fear as well of what was going to happen and what eventually did happen. But I think pride as well. I can very distinctly remember my dad welling up at the airport when he dropped me off for the last time. And that, you know, then ended up being the very last time that I saw him in years. So that's a nice sort of memory to hold on to, this sort of
Right.
bobbing and looking through the sort of check-in point to see him stood there.
Right. A good visual to go back to when you need to have a moment with him, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you said you graduated from your master's, you applied to GRI, got the job, you were in the UK kind of trying to figure out your next steps. 2 weeks later, you're in a national park in Zambia. Tell me about that transition a little bit, and just kind of your, like, you touched down in Zambia and that adaptation, if you will, just kind of.
Yeah, I think the first night, so I don't know how many of us have been there, but sort of GRI's core base is in the grounds of the Lai Lodge at the Elephant Nursery, and that was kind of the first stopping point. So I had probably a 16, 17-hour journey, and then sort of ended up in this elephant nursery surrounded by this gorgeous bush, and shown my accommodation for the evening, and then what ended up being, I guess, the next 3 years, which was a big safari tent. The sounds of bush babies in the trees, and yeah, I just remember sort of lying in the bed thinking, what on earth have I done? Where am I? What is going on?
Like, how did I get here?
Yeah, but it was so exciting. So for that first year that I was with GRI, I was a volunteer working specifically in the education program. At that time, our community and education projects were separated or had not yet come together, I guess is a better way to say it. And then I also had this role of supervising short-term volunteers who came. We still have a program coming in every 3 weeks to learn and help us out and become global ambassadors for the organization. So I was based out in Kafue National Park at the release facility for the first year. And at that stage, I think we were working in 25 primary schools in that area in the south of Kafue. So I worked very closely with education officers, with local teachers, and with the international volunteers. A lot of the time was spent traveling into communities, in sort of Hiluxes and having dust in your hair, and I was sort of renowned for having very dirty feet, I think.
I remember.
And yeah, just living this kind of extraordinary life that I'd yearned for, literally getting to see lions on the way to work, living amongst these incredible guys who are dedicating their lives to working with the elephants and preserving the elephants. At that stage, I didn't have so much exposure to the resource protection side, which is all the law enforcement rangers, but a lot of crossover then with the wildlife rescue team. There's one night in particular where we had a new orphan elephant rescue in, and the facility manager was off camp, and I was radioed in my tent because it had collapsed. And I remember running over to the boma, which, as you remember, is quite a distance, in the middle of the night with no torch, and complete disregard for any of the many regulations that, you know, drilled into you and that I drilled into people for so long, and being on the phone with someone while the guys were putting a drip in and thinking, what on earth is going on? How is this my life? This is incredible. But you get so much, I guess, drive from being around these keepers and even the cooks and the ground staff who are all so invested in keeping this project running, and seeing how they do it, you just keep going, and it's incredible. And I think throughout that year there was several cases similar where there was some level of rescue or some crisis. And over that course of that year, realizing that, okay, I don't know anything about animals. I'm not going to pretend to. I'm the girl who does the teaching and has fun with my kids. But the fact that I'm here boiling the pasta for that team makes me a really important person on this camp right now. So yeah, just this incredible sense of team spirit and togetherness, and we can do anything. We've got this.
There really is, especially on camp, you know, where we were stationed at the release facility, there really is an energy about it that is really hard to explain. You know, it's kind of like this mix of, you know, extreme gratitude to peace, kind of like you mentioned, and like home, but also knowing, you know, the work that you're doing is having an impact, even how small it may be. So I think that that's something that is very, very obvious to anyone who, whether you spend a month there or whether you spend 5 years there, it's very obvious. So I do want to touch on a little bit, because when we met, obviously, was when I was volunteering, and you touched on this briefly a bit earlier. When we met, you were single, you know, stationed in Zambia, and then now fast forward 5 years later, you're married, you have a beautiful 15-month-old son. And from someone who's been on all the camps, you know, Wi-Fi isn't prevalent, you know, obviously our normal media isn't present. How exactly did you begin a relationship and maintain a relationship to a point where you were planning a wedding in the UK from Zambia, I assume, when obviously, you know, you don't have things like Bumble and Tinder or all the other electronic ways you meet people these days. So I'm just interested. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually met at a GRI fundraiser. So I'd encourage you all to attend those whenever you get the opportunity.
Conversation with a side of matchmaking.
Yeah. No, so it's a Zambian run fundraiser called the Elephant Charge, and GRI is one of the beneficiaries, and we usually participate. And it's basically a sort of 4x4 off-roading crazy challenge. You've never seen anything like it. And that was the first year that I had gone, and I was running a little kids corner for participants' kids in the local community. And Rob was in a team, and then he was also helping some friends at the bar. And yeah, we kind of made gooey eyes at each other across the big marquee tent there for the long weekend. And then finally on the last night, there's this huge party where they sort of announce all the teams, winnings and teams. And yeah, he came up to me and was like, "What's your name?" So I said, "I don't know." And then he said, "Okay, where'd you come from?" And I was like, I don't know.
I can't remember.
Okay, well, how long have you lived in Zambia? I don't know. And then, okay, can I get your drink? So I was like, okay. And he handed me water and then walked off. And yeah, he went back to his friends and was like, no, didn't work out. And I went back to my friends and was like, yeah, I talked to a boy. And yeah, that was kind of the start of it. I think the first 2 or 3 dates that we went on, I still couldn't speak, couldn't eat, couldn't function at all. So it was clearly love at first sight. But yeah, the first kind of couple of years, I would only see him for maybe 4 days of a month. So I was still living out in the bush at that time and would come into Lusaka. Actually brilliant, because he had a house with electricity and a bath, and I would just
luxury
turn on the light switches every time I went there and wash properly. And then I guess after about 3 years, my job by then had really evolved and become much more office-based anyway. I think the projects that we'd set up had started to become a little bit more sustainable, and it became almost inappropriate and strange that I would be there because we've got such a fantastic team of community and education officers. So at that point, I kind of started looking at moving to Lusaka and moved in together. I think half of GRI was sort of complicit in our engagement. They all planned this very elaborate surprise to the Seychelles. And then, yeah, our CEO Sport spoke at my wedding. Peanut, the CEO of David Shepherd Foundation, was a witness at my other wedding. So yeah, it really is a sort of
family affair.
Exactly.
And then you were saying that when you ended up leaving Zambia to go back to the UK, you know, when you first left to join GRI, you came with one suitcase or one bag, and then you left with a 20-yard container and, pregnant. Quite a different progression in your life from then.
Yeah.
So last question, because I want to be cognizant of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, you have a 15-month-old son now. Fast forward, think about your future self, and your son at 5, 10, whatever the age may be, comes to you and is like, sees a picture and says, "Hey, mom," or "Mom, why are you living in a tent in this picture?" Or why are you living in basically a camp when we have electricity and everything here? How do you answer that question?
I think I would tell him about the people that we've worked with. At the moment we empowered 200 women. We've educated over 15,000 kids. Our radio shows are currently reaching 75,000 households every single week, and they're only going to grow and grow and grow. And to me, none of it was a sacrifice. It was 100% the life that I wanted to be living. Leaving that lifestyle was huge conflict for me. I battled over that decision for many, many months. But yeah, I truly believe that we are making a huge impact. Wildlife is recovering. Even in the short space of time that I was in Zambia, the 5 years from the beginning to the end, the wildlife is coming back. People's lives are changing. The team that we work with, their lives are changing. They had so many amazing opportunities. And yeah, it still is the best days of my life. So yeah, I think, and our hope and plan is that we will still be visiting Zambia very, very regularly. We still have family there, including GRI family. So I hope that he wouldn't question that. I hope he would be just ask me when he's going to have the opportunity to go back and stay in that same tent.
That's a really good point. Not a why as so much as a when. Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. Kind of get the next generation going on sort of the work that we need to do, because obviously it's going to be a group effort. And I find it super interesting how you mentioned that you came from this sort of career-oriented or corporate-oriented family that was kind of driven by title and dollar, because obviously growing up in the States, you're that's kind of pounded into your head. And it's even when I was thinking about volunteering, and I kind of had this long time dream to go to Africa. And I was like, there's no way, like, I have to be at this level by this age and make this much. And I think that the takeaway is that there's always a way. You can find a way to get involved. You can find a way to do the things you want to do, still while maintaining, what you feel like is keeping you at home, if you will. So, I think that for someone who is looking to get involved, what advice would you give them?
I think, yeah, throw yourself into whatever opportunity comes your way. Volunteer as much as you can in whatever capacity you can. Talk to everyone. You never know who's sitting next to you on the bus. I treat every single person that I meet as if they're the secret millionaire, because one day it will be the secret millionaire, and they might want to fund our program. I think I have been extremely fortunate, and I guess a huge part of the reason that I was able to even get on that plane to Zambia was because my dad had died and left me money and spent most of my childhood behind a laptop working instead of interacting with me. So I totally understand that I was in a very, very privileged situation to be able to say, you know, screw it, I'm getting on a plane, I'm going to volunteer for a year and just see what happens. But, you know, you also work for that opportunity, and to be invited to stay and to take on new roles and build yourself into a place where that life can become sustainable.
Right. Well, I know we're going to switch it back over to question and answer. I just want to say quickly again, thank you so, so much. Speaking from experience, spending some time with you in your element, what you do, the world is so very lucky to have you. And I just want to say thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. And I hope you're going to come back and volunteer with us soon.
I'm already working on it. So
okay, cool.
We'll see you in Zambia 2021.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Melissa?
Yes, Jenny, thank you. That was a really nice journey to go on with you guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Flora, and I am the Events Director with the Endangered Species Fund, and I'm located in Detroit, Michigan. I wanted to thank you for joining us today for our Story Safari. If you could please subscribe to our channel in the link, and then you can also join us in the comment section. We'd love to learn more about you. Please stay tuned for any future episodes that we are doing in the Story Safari project. And then a little note to cap us off is, as the African saying goes, if you think you're too small to make a difference, you've never spent the night with a mosquito. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon.